So our topic tonight is Minnesota's native fish. And our presenter is Tyler Winter. And I can only assume that a lot of you are here to hear Tyler talk about his work. He is a graduate of UMD, so he's back in town here to talk with a hometown audience. He's from the Breckenridge chapter, the Izaak Walton League down in the Twin Cities area. So thank you for making the trip up to talk to us. And Tyler's been instrumental in the Minnesota Division's work to reevaluate the approach to native fish in Minnesota. So, Tyler, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for coming. It doesn't seem like that long ago I was giving this message to people one person at a time on a riverbank. So it's just great when I can bring people together like this. As I said, I'm a member of the Breckenridge chapter, which happened because we filmed a fishing show at the back on the Mississippi River there, and Tim from the Breckenridge chapter recognized it and reached out and said, "This is happening in our backyard. We should be involved." So that I'm absolutely in love with Izaak Walton Lake and always will be because of that outreach. So important. But me and my friends also did start our own conservation organization just focused on fish called Native Fish for Tomorrow. I'm also a board member of Minnesota Conservation Federation and a member of several other organizations because I figured out that showing up and getting involved actually does make a difference. And I'm here to talk about the first comprehensive native fish conservation bill in the country. Every state has laws on its books that mirror what I'm talking about, what we changed here in Minnesota. And how did I get involved? Well, I caught a mooneye once. I was a kid, I was 14, and I caught a mooneye in Janesville ditch number 11. The water body so remarkable, didn't even have a real name. And this silver fish jumped out of the water. It was muddy water, and I had no idea what it was. And it taught me that there are mysteries even left in the fish here in Minnesota. In fact, nobody knew what that fish was because it was weird. It had big eyes and it had teeth on its tongue. Like they don't get more normal the closer you look at it. And the next thing you know, I was catching a big mouth buffalo on a fishing show. Like that just happens to people. And then I put together, with help, we formed a coalition of conservation organizations that reject the rough fish paradigm and are working with Minnesota DNR to create a new native fish paradigm, which is now the cover of the DNR's calendar, which you all have to take. There's 50 in the back, so 2 for everyone. What is the rough fish paradigm? It is the idea that we should systematically devalue and eradicate native fish from our ecosystem as if they are harmful, that they should be replaced, that they're somehow devaluing things. And this sounds like maybe I'm making this up, but they wrote it down. The very first commission report of the state fish commissioners just derided the vermin of the waters. And it was like, if we could just get rid of them, we were going to get rid of sturgeon and pickerel. And then we're going to have salmon and whitefish for the commercial fisheries. Now, sturgeon have obviously made that leap, right, from egg-devouring vermin to a prized and valued thing. And now, Minnesota, we're making the leap for the rest of these fish, right? Sturgeon made that leap, 75, 100 years ago? But we forgot the other ones. So now we're changing it. In fact, when I joined the Breckenridge chapter, their chapter bylaws said that one of the purposes of the chapter was to eradicate so-called rough fish. Because that's how deep this rough fish paradigm cut. The conservation organizations thought that the good work to do was to get rid of suckers and other native fish. But Tim Johnson from the Breckenridge chapter, he wrote the resolution which we passed there, which then went on to national. For the 100th anniversary, the national organization passed a resolution saying that all states should manage non-game and game native fish. for their ecosystem services. But what do I mean when I talk about native fish? Right? It's a little bit vague, because there's a lot of fish that fall under that category, but I'm specifically talking about our native rough fish. These are the fish that have been systematically devalued, that were considered vermin of the waters. And there's a lot of diversity there. Just the buffalo alone is 3 species. Black buffalo, with the excited angler up there, that's a state threatened species. Smallmouth buffalo, we now know can live for over 100 years. Big mouth buffalo were the first fish that Dr. Lackman aged to be over 100 years. These are all native fish. Big mouth buffalo are commercially very important. Red horse, we have 6 species of red horse. I've only caught 5, but try not to bring that up. But there's an incredible amount of diversity there. The longnose and white suckers, which are both actually thrive in cold water. Every year, me and my family go, we have a spot and we catch white suckers while there's still ice in the lake. That's actually how we mark the beginning of spring. And there's even more sucker diversity. There's actually 17 species of suckers just in Minnesota. But sucker diversity is actually there's so much sucker diversity, and all but one of them is found in North America, that just this year, a new species, the sickle-fin red horse, was just described. Some people think that there are 10 more cryptic species of suckers living in North America. They're currently confused with like another species. That's how much diversity we're talking about. That has been obscured by lumping them all in with rough fish. Then there's your ancient fish, your gar and your bowfin, which diverged from the other bonefish 150 or 250 million years ago. I want to just point out right here, this young of year gar, which this is not an injury to its tail. This actually has an extra tail filament that it uses like a flagella to swim, so that it doesn't wiggle like a fish when it swims. They have when they come out of their eggs, they have a sucker on their nose that they use to attach to vegetation. They're not just a primitive fish, they're an entirely different lineage of fish, which has been understudied because they're rough fish. And then there's the moon eye and the gold eye, another fish completely overlooked. In fact, moon eye were not listed in the definition of rough fish prior to the native fish bill. And also so understudied that when they were looking for the host, the federally endangered spectacled case mussel, they tried 48 different host animals before somebody thought maybe we should try the moon eye because they are found where the mussels are. It was right, I mean, pretty obvious when you think about it. And now that they've started doing some research on them, we found that these fish, which maybe 12, 14 inches, they're not huge, have been documented migrating almost 100 miles from Taylor's Falls all the way down to Mississippi and back, which then means that they might have spread federally endangered mussels to other places that we haven't even looked yet, which we didn't know because we weren't studying them. And drum diversity, which, wait for a laugh from the ichthyology crowd, is a great fish joke because there's only one freshwater. But they have the longest north to south distribution from Hudson Bay to Guatemala of any freshwater fish. They can live to be 75 years old. They're host to 11 species of freshwater mussels. 50% of their diet can be zebra mussels. They taste great. Their eggs float, which means they go over dams, which means they're often missing from above dams, which is a problem because they're host to native mussels and they eat zebra mussels. So this fish, even though it is often, disregarded as being ubiquitous, you think they're missing from maybe 60%, about 60% of dams in Minnesota, according to one survey, which I think makes them the most underrated fish in Minnesota. Here they are eating zebra mussels for us, and what were we doing? Unlimited harvest. Because they provide so many ecosystem services. They're fun to catch. They eat the zebra mussels. They feed the charismatic birds. They transport nutrients when they migrate. They feed people. Those are fish sticks I've made out of red horse or buffalo. I can't remember. And it takes a school of fish to perform ecosystem services. It turns out there's some great research coming out of the Shed Aquarium from Murchie, Childress, and McIntyre. And they have found, they believe that white suckers and long-nosed suckers are the largest group of migratory fish in the Great Lakes. And they have shown that they transport nutrients upstream, which benefit non-native salmonids, because they are eating the young and the eggs of the native fish. And so anglers for the longest time have caught long-nosed suckers in the spring, and then when they're fishing for steelhead with an egg, and wanted to get rid of them. It turns out these fish are actually improving the productivity of our Great Lakes streams. And the work out of Shed has been great. They've got a citizen science project going, and they have people go and volunteer and observe the sucker ponds and are publishing great research on that. But I want to go back to the origins of this idea, this rough fish idea, because in the beginning, there was no such thing. There were just fish. And people accessed fish when they were available. In fact, there is a archaeological site in Minnesota, the Three Bridges site, I think it's near Bemidji, and the site is full of white sucker bones. And the pottery spans an 800-year time frame. People were showing up at this site in the spring, like my family does now, every year to harvest white suckers during the spawn. That's how people were relating to fish. And these, this is in our place names across Minnesota. Sucker Lakes and Sucker Rivers. Buffalo, Minnesota is named for the fish. And Candy Ojai is Lakota for the place where the buffalo fish come. Next time you see Candy Ojai bottled water, remember that's buffalo fish water. But then the fish got rough. There became a division. Commercial, there's a couple different thoughts on how this happened. Commercial fishermen would fully dress or fillet species, maybe they had less bones, and the rough dressed fish became rough fish. They were cheaper, and so they became maybe associated with people who had less means. The other idea is that it relates back to the English division of horse fishing and game fishing. I've never heard those theories held in equal regard. But the fact of the matter is that what happened is train companies gave free passage to the cars that carried trout and game fish to stock. So they could sell tickets to the end of the line. And so people would start taking fishing vacations, and people with means took fishing vacations to the end of the line where the fish stopped. And people without means fished at home in an urban area, probably warm water, and probably for food. And in 1907, this got put in Minnesota statute. That's the first instance of this rough fish category. Interestingly, in the beginning, they didn't even have a list. There was like, when you see them. And the list included at one point snapping turtles, yellow perch. It didn't include whitefish at first, but they got added and then taken on. But when you've got turtles on a list of rough fish, that's a good sign that maybe it's not a scientific idea. And it became this, classist thing. People would go fishing, and then we started catching and releasing fish and having, farmed salmon for dinner. And then it became literally newsworthy, to make suckers for dinner. Literally, I've taken reporters fishing for suckers, and they made, fish sticks or fish cakes, and that ended up in the newspaper. Literally a novel idea now. And the game fish just kind of took over, right? And it became this idea that it was a totally normal. Nobody questioned why you might poison a series of lakes to get rid of the long-nosed suckers and replace them with rainbow trout. The long-nosed sucker gets special mention because it is listed in the State Wildlife Action Plan, but is not listed as a species of special concern in the administrative rules. It's the only species that's not in both places. But they do mention that it's an unknown decline of long-term decline of unknown, which is pretty funny because we did poison them and put barriers up so they couldn't come. Kimball, Mink, and Boy Lakes were last reclaimed in 2013. However, no long-nosed suckers were actually harmed at that time because the long-nosed suckers never came back. What came back was yellow perch and smallmouth bass, which kind of is a really perfect example of how removing the native fish destabilizes environments and makes them ripe for invasion. So hopefully we're learning from that, right? But it just became normal, unlimited harvests. And so this is a still taken from a YouTube video where two guys bragged about killing 82 gar. And people were mad, people were outraged, right? But like, what really set people off was when the conservation officers investigated and determined that no laws had been broken. Which, this is just to make a point, we do have to kind of understand a little bit about the structure of Minnesota's game and fish laws. We are a permissive state, which there's literally, 97.8.501, there's a line in there that says, if we don't specifically allow it, then it's not allowed. So that implies that, killing 82 gar and throwing them away was somehow allowed. You won't see that in the statutes actually, because wanton waste is illegal. But they exist in this gray area where enforcement was impossible, which was in violation of the North American model of wildlife conservation, which I think is an incredibly important and often misunderstood thing. Because this is the most successful conservation model in the world. It's brought us, such hits as turkeys all over. That's a turkey at a wastewater treatment plant. This is the air we breathe. This is the world we work in, is these 7 principles of the North American model. 6 of these principles are violated by the idea of the roughish paradigm, right? We're not conserving or holding in trust. You used to be legally allowed to harvest recreationally these fish and sell them, which made enforcement of limits impossible. As we saw, the laws weren't able to be enforced. You had to have a legitimate purpose. Confusing a fish for an invasive species is not a legitimate purpose. Managing as an international resource, because we know that some fish, like buffalo, right, migrate in and out of Canada. We should treat it as an international resource. They don't understand boundaries. And scientific management, which, as we know, wasn't happening. And these are reflected in our laws. These principles are enshrined in our laws. It says in our Constitution that we shall manage our natural resources by law for the public good. And in statute, it literally is laid out. These things are supported in law, and we were violating those principles. The wanton waste statute, which is so clear, may not wantonly waste or destroy, but yet people were having tournaments and openly advertising that they were going to dispose of all the fish. Like, that seems to be a pretty clear violation of the wanton waste statute. Or the sign in this park, where throwing dead fish in the ground was so common, they had to put up a sign. So how do we change it? How did we change it? We changed it here. We start with some science. Here we have a graph, trend analysis of white suckers in Minnesota, showing maybe a 50% decline for white suckers in lakes. But this didn't necessarily motivate people a ton. This was actually published in 2015. Because there's a lot of people have maybe different feelings about white suckers. Love them, right? According to fish IBIs, they're a generalist feeder, which means they take off some points off your fish IBI. I think it's a terrible way to look at the value of a fish. Because they perform so many ecosystem services. You may have heard about the fishing wolves of voyagers. They're eating white suckers. We know they migrate. They're culturally important. The Ojibwe recognized the suckerfish moon in February. They're commercially important. Over $1 each for a medium sucker. And I have seen portage in the boundary waters that stunk because the eagles had taken so many white suckers. And so when you understand the value of the white sucker and you think about all the animals and the people that might depend on white suckers. Oh, I was gonna say, I could literally talk for an hour about white suckers and I won't now, because you can listen to the Fish of the Week podcast about white suckers that I was on. I recommend it. It's edited beautifully, so it's just the good parts. So you put the value of the white sucker together with the decline. And now you've got now you can get people motivated. Now you can be like, wait a minute, this is gonna impact my eagle watching. This is gonna impact the wolves that I think are so cool. That's how you motivate people and persuade people and get to people. You need more than just a graph. You have to have, like to say, a symbiotic relationship with the scientists, like Dr. Lackman, because that gives us, the research gives us things to talk about, gives us news stories, that gets it out here. Saying 5 years ago, I emailed him, he didn't get a lot of fan mail. I emailed him because I fished for buffalo, nobody understood. And now when I tell people I'm fishing for buffalo, they get excited. People will come back to it, right? And they will say, like, point to the problem, show me the data, right? And I literally predicted this happening with this graph. I saw this graph, people could, but it's not just that, right? The problem is not just a potential decline in the fish. It's bigger than that. The problem really is this socio-ecological system. The problem is here. Because if you want to do a dam removal or a habitat restoration, but people think they won't want those fish in their lake, now they're going to oppose helping the entire ecosystem, right? We understand that, conservation and ecosystem restorations are maybe more than just a population of fish, right? It's people valuing the resource and investing in it. And this is what brings me to the track front. We have so much news and bad news about invasive species that people see big-mouth buffalo on the river and they think it must be an invasive species. And they think, this river is so filled with invasive species, it's so degraded, it's so polluted, I'll just throw my trash there too. And they're like, and who would go? Who would take their family down and fish there or eat the fish? Who would do that? We should probably put up a no fishing sign to protect them from one side, right? That's not the kind of place people should be recreating. And then people don't go. So the negative connotations and stereotypes are allowed to continue because they don't learn about it. And it repeats and it affects the fish, the water, and the people. And I believe we can move to the native fish paradigm, the native fish cycle, where we inspire curiosity about our native fish. And people see those buffalo and go, hey, that's that fish that lives to be over 100 years old. And people go to the river to see them and to fish for them, and they catch them, and maybe they even eat one, and they value it. And I've seen this changing. This is a real thing. And we can do these feedback cycles at other scales as well. There's federal funding for the Sportfish Restoration Fund, because historically, the money I spent on fishing stuff went to go help game fish. But we can access these funds for Minnesota's native fish. And going out and fishing, sometimes that is the answer, because you can make a news story about it. You can get people curious. When things are accessible, they're a resource to people. And if you polite and kind and you work well with others, you can even get other people to help with your messaging and help promote it. And the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources has been great in this, which is why my daughter is in the fishing next door. And my daughter and my son are on the calendar. But what we really started pushing was when the Izaak Walton filed a petition for administrative rulemaking, which is something I didn't know how to do. Tom Casey and Tim Johnson really helped with that. I brought the fish knowledge, they brought that technical expertise. We were able to put that together and start working on stuff. Then you make legislative connection to the legislature. And sometimes all you have to do then is be the person who shows up and says, I care, we care. And every year, the DNR has a technical changes bill. In 2023, they proposed a change to exempt carp from the wanton waste statute. Because oddly enough, that invasive species was protected by the wanton waste statute, which really created a lot of that gray area, which made enforcement really hard. And why did they say they did this? To help provide greater protections for native fish. That's working together for a common goal. So we got the no junk fish bill passed, we put together a work group. We had a meeting, 5 meetings, there was a report, drafted the native fish bill. And the Senate sponsor held up the written testimony in the committee hearing. He said there's been an outpouring of support for this bill. There were 11 pieces of written testimony. That's how many people it took to make an outpouring of support. We passed through that committee with no opposition. And we got Minnesota's native fish bill. Don't try to do this. There's sometimes it just isn't a good photo to convey the fact that there's 41 amendments in a bill. And then it's really complicated. Because these are laws that went back to 1907. These definitions, have been on the books, and it'd been like a band-aid approach. We'll just keep adding on, right? Like, we need to do something with Mooneye. So Mooneye became a minnow if they were under 7 inches. Under 7 inches? Nobody knew. Like, there were tons of things like that need to be fixed. Number 1, major change, biggest thing. Common carp were taken out of the definition of rough fish for the first time, which meant we now had a group of fish that was only native fish and were not being managed with the invasive fish kingdom. And we had this old definition which didn't actually include Mooneye, carp buffalo, which was actually one of the buffaloes a threatened species. So like shouldn't have been in there. And now we have a definition based on scientific classifications. So like people can actually understand this, And this now we now have native rough fish in the fishing register, separate from invasive species. There are quite a few places in these 41 amendments that were literally like a find and replace exercise. I'm not going to lie. This is my favorite example of this. When Minnesota gave the federal lands to Voyageurs National Park, we maintained our sovereignty over the water. And to prove that, the DNR commissioner has the authority to remove rough fish from the water. They don't do this, but I'm not going to die on that hill about giving the commissioner the authority to remove native rough fish. If that's how the state's going to demonstrate its sovereignty, so be it. Pick your battles. But there were three big places that we got the phrase native rough fish added. And these are 3 huge. 1, liability for restitution. Previously, if you broke a law about rough fish, there was no financial compensation for that. There was for minnows and leeches, because leeches are minnows in state law. So if you wantonly wasted a pound of leeches, you'd have to pay the market value for them. And if you wantonly wasted a literal ton of buffalo, you paid nothing. You could buy and sell these fish without any sort of commercial license. If you did that with game fish, you lost your license. That's now true for the native rough fish as well. And this is a favorite one, transported through the state. you can't transport more than one possession limit for obvious reasons, right? That did not apply to rough fish, and so you could just be like, well, officer, I've got 100 limits from my 100 buddies, but I'm just transporting. So now somebody got stopped and they're over limit on a native rough fish. That's actually illegal. And there are habitat protections as well. Barriers, valuations for aquaculture, so on and so forth. But that's the high level stuff, that's the statute stuff. And, you know, so we, it's the first comprehensive native fish conservation bill because we did go back to the foundations of these things. But for the time, it's going to take time for that to then reach the part we see in the fishing regs book, to be honest. That these administrative rules have to be made through process with public comment periods and administrative law judges and all sorts of things before it reads black and white in the regs book where we're going to see it impacted. Some of this stuff has already happened. One of the things that maybe triggered some of this motion was that several years ago, whitefish, ciscos, and burbot or eel pout were taken off the rough fish list, which I do think made a few people wonder if the list was just made up. And since those fish got a head start, they are now have their limits. And the gar, the gar bill, they have a limit of 10. Whitefish is 15, cisco 15, eel pout 4. That's lower than walleyes. That's a fish that went from unlimited to lower than walleye. And I think this is, you know, a reflection of the fact that fishermen are pretty good. We can target fish. Ice fishing is more popular. These are fish that live in cold water, threatened by climate change. But I also think it reflects an understanding that by anglers and by the public that we are having an impact on the world, and we need to be responsible in that. Also, poor eel pout is definitely a meal. You know, if you need to feed more people, bring a friend with, bring your kids with, be fishing. We have to stay engaged because the administrative rulemaking isn't done. So it's going to take more work, but I think the benefits of a new native fish paradigm are well worth the effort because it's going to benefit our ecosystems and it's going to help us recruit a new generation of conservationists. In big picture, I do want to point out, I don't have any special qualifications for this, maybe other than the fact that I can catch a buffalo on camera. When I think back on how I got involved in this, number one, being nice. I'm a civil servant myself, and I knew that when I was working with other people and civil servants in particular, the only way they could get rid of me is if I was rude. And so I was just unfailingly nice. And if I asked a question or wrote an email and I didn't get a response, I just assumed that that was a really good question or a really good email that didn't have an easy answer. I didn't get mad at people. I just let that do the work for me. And then I never got rid of it. And communicating constantly. Every cool thing I've gotten to do, and it's not all up here, some National Geographic documentary and I don't know what all. This happened because I like picked up the phone and wrote an email to a stranger. I'm gonna because I wrote him a random email. Like, just send a random email. Like, put yourself out there, communicate with people, reply, pick up the phone. And be patient, ask questions, and number one, showing up. I kept showing up and thinking to myself that I wasn't qualified to be there, and I just waited for somebody more qualified to show up. That's what I told myself. That's how I got over my imposter syndrome. When someone more qualified than me shows up, I'll give them the spot. Special thanks to organizations that supported the Native Fish Bill. Nation Conservancy, Izaak Walton League was first on this. Minnesota Conservation Federation, and Miles, Joe, Ryan, and Meteor had the idea like of doing the fishing show for Buffalo, and that opened so many doors. And locally, St. Croix 360 is a fantastic local newsletter resource from Roy, who did the stories on sucker fishing, and he wrote the story in Minnesota Conservation Volunteer. You may have seen this winter. He wrote that as well. Any questions?
Did you ever work with Carol Henderson?
I,
Use that model at all that,
you know, I met Carol because we both got an award from the National Izaak Walton League. We're both members of the Breckenridge chapter,
right,
and we got to, they wanted photos of us together. And I knew of his reputation. He was a hero of mine then. But I can't say that I consciously copied him. I will say when I met Carol Henderson, I had the chance to ask him if he knew how many species he had brought back to Minnesota. So I told him I thought of him whenever I saw the swans in my cabin. And he told me, I don't know. Living legend.
well, he is a pioneer, an amazing person, and you are too.
Stop.
You are.
I have to have a beard so you can't see me blushing.
One that I'm frustrated with, something called dogfish, I didn't hear you ever mention that.
Oh, dogfish or bowfin?
That's the same thing.
Yes, and I absolutely love, catching those things.
Oh, yeah,
Oh, absolutely.
they're messy.
They're absolutely worth it. I got on a very good bowfin bite this summer. And after wrestling with them, they breathe air. So you get them out of the water, they don't quit fighting, right? They don't know their feet. So I went, I got safety gloves at Menards and pike jaw spreader. I lost my jaw spreader. And I get this thing on the bank and I'm trying to get its mouth open because now it won't open it for me. And I'm fighting with this and I get the jaw spreader in its mouth. I'm like, now I got you beat. And I'm gonna get this hook out. And it closed its mouth on the pike jaw spreader and spit it out. Back to square one. Then they're biting me through the glove.
Don't blame all, but they're.
I mean, everything is edible. Except gar eggs are poisonous. Gar eggs are poisonous. Bowfin eggs, actually, I should have flat on this. Bowfin eggs are actually made in caviar. And there are places in the United States where they have started harvesting bowfin for caviar. One of the changes in the Minnesota, in the native fish bill, which I found as an Easter egg, was that bowfin were taken off the commercial fish list. I think that was a little foresight from management of the Minnesota DNR. They didn't want to manage a caviar fishery for obvious reasons. Bowfin are notorious for having very soft meat, and that gets soft very quickly. In parts of Louisiana, they are considered a delicacy. I've heard it described as like cotton candy, deep fried. In the Midwest, we like a firm fish. So I'm catching release on that, but open to a open recipe if anyone has come up with one. So
Congratulations on your work. I'm Doug Jensen with Minnesota Botanical Research. Water species, we're in part of the world where the state. Two questions for you. Have you brought this to the attention of the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies?
was there a Midwest meeting of that?
Yes.
Yes, and Steve Harrington from the Nature Conservancy, who is the primary person from the Nature Conservancy working on that, and Shannon Fisher presented down there on the native fish. I do think other states are going to follow this model. I suspect there's going to be, they're going to want to see if the wheels come off in Minnesota when we take, like if we stop unlimited harvest on bowfin, are they just going to take over? No, we're not, you know. And even if they do, people catch and release bass. And once people find out that you can catch and release bowfin, bass fishing is going to take a tank, like it's so much more fun to catch a bowfin. They're getting bigger and fight stronger, so.
So that came into the next question I have for you. So, once these regulations are in place, is there a plan to do some monitoring of these species to show the improvement to go along with. So that some more leverage to get it expanded across the United States.
That's an interesting question because we're not 100% sure what is going to be the response. And for a lot of these fish, there isn't a huge amount of them. And connecting possession limits to harvest is really hard because it has so much to do, think of bass and walleyes. They both have a limit of 6, right? People eat every walleye they catch. I do too. I don't know when I'm gonna see another one, so I'm gonna grab this one. And I can go get 6 bass anytime I want, so why would I keep this one? And so connecting those regulations to actual changes, I think is gonna be tough. Also, a lot of these fish are river fish that are poorly monitored. The river systems don't get surveyed as well. Yeah, and we have an incredible database of lake monitoring here in Minnesota with very strict methodology for long periods of time, and the river monitoring just isn't that robust. I really do believe that a huge benefit of this effort is that socio-ecological system, right? Is if people understand that a sturgeon, where you get 1 per year, is more valuable than a muskie, where you might get 1 per day, which is more valuable than 6 bass or 25 sunfish. And that having limits in these books, because I literally was told so many times when I'd say, oh, I think you should, are you gonna let that go? And people would say to me, well, the DNR wants you to kill them. And you'd open up the book and it'd say unlimited. And that, changing that mindset, right? Take what you can eat, value the water they swim, is gonna do, it will probably help the population some, but it's gonna help the way people relate to the river. You know, and to the water. It's gonna, you know, I really do believe that it's gonna change people's perspective, especially about warm water rivers.
Just one more thing on that, the invasive species sign that you showed, we had the silver parrot on there.
Yeah,
So with some irony that you use that because that is the most consuming fish in the world.
yeah,
You're not shipping them from Illinois, cheapest fishery, and we shipping them
Yeah.
back with China.
people have, you know, well, can you eat carp? And it's like, how do you think they got here? You know, in 1890, the Fish Commission report said that carp were very popular among the German immigrants. You know,
I'm really fascinated by the ecological role that some of these native fish play that most people are unaware of. You mentioned a couple of them, you know, being hosts for mussels and also the nutrients they provide by migrating upstream. Could you elucidate maybe a couple more that you think most people are not aware of that might be of interest?
the mussel hosting thing is huge. Many species bowfin host mussels. Basically all of them are a mussel host of some sort. I've been told we are probably underestimating the mussel hosts on suckers because suckers are very hard to keep in captivity. Freshwater drum hosts 11 species because freshwater drum eat mussels preferentially. And so it's very easy for a female mussel to get eaten by a freshwater drum and then infect her larva onto their mussels. There are red horse that do that as well, but we don't know what they host for mussels. Another one that I do love is the way suckers in particular disturb the bottom. They flip rocks so they feed and while they spawn. If you do much with stream restoration, you know that embedded sediments are the death of a stream. If you have cobbles that's filled in with silt, there's no space for the bugs to eat. If you have a fish that'll come through and flip a rock for you and unembed it, you're combating that habitat degradation. And I've literally seen marks in the Mississippi River where the rocks are visible again with a sucker feeding on. That's poorly researched. It's been shown that the Sonoran sucker is an ecosystem engineer because they alter the bottom of the stream so much. I'm looking forward to somebody doing that research somewhere in the Midwest. But I'll say that my dad's red horse fishing streams have the most other fish as well, especially bass. And you find bass. You have a big sucker in a stream, there will be 2 bass next to it, one on each side. They will compete for that space next to the fish because they know that big fish is gonna scare up a crayfish or loosen something on the bottom and they're gonna get a meal out. And so they follow them around. When I'm fishing for, I got a 10-pound river redfish in front of me. I gotta catch the 2 bass next to it before I can get my bait to the 10-pound fish. So that's another one of those things that those sort of like relationships, where you've got a fish that's actively benefiting other fish, or they're transporting nutrients or something like that. But I mean, like, why do eagles lay their eggs while it's still snowing? Because they want their eggs to hatch when the suckers are migrating up and showing. So that it's all stuck together. And we're talking about 26 species of fish. Some of them big. Blue suckers migrate hundreds of miles. Buffalo migrate 150 miles or more. You know, and you find lots of big ones. A lot of them get eaten pretty quick.
Can you talk a little bit about the lifespans of some of those fish? That's the other thing that's amazing.
Yes, well, I mean, I feel embarrassed to talk about it in front of Dr. Blackman, so ask him questions afterwards, but his groundbreaking research, do you have a count on how many species you've doubled or tripled the lifespans of? Yeah, you should like tally them up, like, if you quadruple the lifespan that's published, that'd be like going platinum or something, because what, buffalo used to be thought to be 30 years old, and now it's over 120. The other 2 species of buffalo, Dr. Lackman published research showing they live to be over 100. Silver red horse is 40. Blue suckers are
Yes. They can go over years as well.
40.
Years.
That was a fish that, well, we thought lived to be 12. So he only tripled the lifespan of bowfin as we know it.
Other carnivores, suckers, they also live years.
Yeah, before I came over here, I was just over at his lab and he showed me the thin sections of the otolith, the ear bone of a fish under a compound microscope. And it's just like rings on a tree, you know. And yeah, when he first counted up a buffalo that was 90 years old and it was 3 or 4 times as old as it was supposed to be, it was so shocking that he had to have the otolith bomb radiocarbon dated to prove that he had counted. And the signature of nuclear testing from the 1960s showed up right in the middle of that fish's ear bone. So that's, and that was 2019.
Yeah, that's good.
And 2020, I got a phone call asking if I could catch a buffalo for a fishing show.
So what are they gonna, or what's the plan with the fusion values and stuff like too, with like some of the species that do have them spreading like God? So the regular species that go fishing tournaments, so the fish disposal trailers are being taken away by 1 or 2 people. But there's potentially several thousand big fish in that trailer.
That is an excellent question. I don't have it. But that will be made by administrative rules, so there will most likely be a public comment here.
You fish with, white rods or fish?
All. Buffalo will take a fly. Red horse and many sucker species frankly are too smart to eat feathers. That, you know, some fish take some precision, some fish take bait, and some fish do take both. So don't look down on a fish that it won't eat things that don't taste good. That's a smart fish.
I've been interested in almost,
Yeah.
and so I did radio years ago,
Mm-hmm.
but we should capture them.
Mm-hmm.
Never,
Yeah.
and we ended up in this level, we ended up. Most of these fish and that. But John was urgent at that time. Was just like. They're cracking. So a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But they kind of fall in. Yeah. They don't have the reputation that.
Lake sturgeon do.
That they do.
Yeah.
And yet there's one
Mhm.
fish one. You know, if there's access, you know?
I don't know it particularly well. I believe harvest is restricted to lower down on the Mississippi River. I do catch them occasionally on the Minnesota River, and they are a incredibly cool looking fish. I recommend that everybody catch one. Be very careful because they are the sharpest fish in Minnesota. They may be docile, but if you make a wrong move, every one of their plates is so sharp. Lake sturgeon tend to get pretty dull over time. I like to think that shovel nose, because they live with the 50-pound flathead in the Minnesota River, keep their armor their whole life. I've definitely been caught up by them myself. They're a really, really cool fish. The DNR does have some large river specialists work on the Minnesota River. And I would absolutely connect with them because I'm sure they are working on those populations.
Is as a kid out of Mississippi and near Clinton, Iowa, being little boy in my spare time I had.
Mm-hmm.
And those sturgeon would sell them if I could get caught this way,
Uh-huh.
but they'd go to knock the bait off and get caught.
Yeah.
And learn very quickly to do this about handling, unfortunately.
Yeah. Oh, that's such a cool looking fish. It's like bleeding. Yeah. Razor blade, yeah. Leather gloves.
What's your go-to bait for buffalo carp?
Buffalo. Sorry, I'm legally obligated to make sure that they're only referred to by name. They're not actually. Sorry. Take that. My number one bait, first of all, is to wait until you find them feeding. If they're not feeding, you will not persuade them to feed. They do not care that you exist. You're not going to get them to react to you. They eat plankton. They'll feed when they feel like it. And so I literally looked for them for years and would find them and I could never get them to bite. And then one day I found them actively feeding, like I had a photo up with their mouth on the surface. And I called my wife and told her I wasn't coming home. And if you have a bait float perfectly in the surface in front of them, they won't go around it. If they see it land in front of them, if you make it move, they'll decide that that's not food, and they'll go under it, come out on the other side. I like to take fly fishermen out and have them learn this themselves. After about half an hour, they go, I think they're missing it on purpose. And then I come to use this like a chubby Chernobyl fly that floats really well and is visible because they're going to be in foam. And presented very, very carefully on the surface is the trick.
I actually told the story of why it's called something.
Yes.
So I had a friend, she grew up on Big Island. And a lot of people forget this. You can shoot a moose or something in February and you will start eating meat. It doesn't actually happen. It was, they actually measured it. It was like it required 6.5 pounds per person per day of moose meat to keep you alive. And she said, amongst the other things, it would be earring all eggs. But in February, suckers, she described it as almost like there was a pressure gradient under the ice. And they would use cedar sticks, float the nets perpendicular to the shore. Her dad had a dog. He'd send the dog out because he could hear the cedar stick bouncing against the ice. And then he threatened them, I'll eat you if you don't find the stick. They'd run, then they'd string the net to the pole. And this was, she said, perpendicular to the shore, and they got suckers.
Yeah.
And was, I had sucker got sued by all three sort of plan.
Yeah.
I knew people, older elders that, man, they love sucker pits too.
A lot of, it's a savory, there's a lot of cartilage and bone in that.
Yeah.
But yeah, and
Nutrition compared to some other things.
Yeah.
Life-saving, that's why that.
Yep.
That February is specifically named for that.
and that matches my own observations of the fish's biology. Me and my friends and my kids, we mark our calendar, we follow the ichthyological calendar. And the year starts in the spring with the first white sucker. And we catch those literally, last week, we got our very first ones, and my daughter had the knack for getting them up to the edge of the ice and getting their nose over the edge and skidding the fish across there. Because as soon as the water in the creek is a little warmer, and it'll melt that creek water ice off, everyone is still ice fishing in the lake, and we'll be catching white suckers that have moved into that creek mouth. And that exactly matches the legend of the suckerfish moon of the suckers, or the people were starving and sacrificed themselves. And the creator repaid them with the ability to multiply themselves 100 times. And so they still honor the suckerfish in February.
Yeah. You give me, and then they finish these small suckers in the spring. That was a normal thing.
If you don't like bones in your food, eat tofu.
Wow, what a great talk for this time. Say what you said to me at the beginning. About wanting to get people to do
Oh,
this work. I think that'd be a great way to.
well, yes. I really do hope that, I think we all probably are here and, we're active in organizations like this because we have one or more things that we're passionate about. I really do hope that some of the things I learned by doing that inspires others to do this, and hopefully we take something away from this. Because in 2018, 2019, I thought this problem was insurmountable. And people told me when we started making progress, they said, I never thought I'd see it in my lifetime. And we did this, completely rewrote the fishing regs books for fish that many people have never heard of. And so if we can do that for buffalo and moon eye, like we can do maybe not everything, but a lot of it. So thank you.
So wonderful talk for as the ice is melting. Just a reminder that thank you to Tyler for being here, for driving up. I think, are you driving back tonight? It's been 2 hours. But thank you for coming and really inspiring talk for us. Remember, no meeting here in April. Buy your banquet tickets. We'll have a computer set up if you want to buy them tonight in the back of the room. And then what I forgot to mention is we will have a speaker at the meeting. We're still working on that. We've got a couple options there, and that'll be Rich's newsletter as soon as we figure that out. So thanks, everybody. And there's still tea and cookies in the back of the room, so stay around.
And you all take
tell
them
fish
down.
stories. Yeah, hand